If someone told you every day for 15 years that they were the most honest person you'd ever meet, would you believe them? What if that person was your husband, the man you built your life around, trusted with your deepest insecurities, and let into every corner of your soul? Would you still believe him if, one quiet morning, detectives knocked on your door with a warrant to excavate your property and he just stood there, frozen, as if he already knew they were coming? If you're here watching this, it's probably because something inside you is craving the truth, maybe not just mine, but your own. Maybe you've doubted someone you love. Maybe you've sensed that something's off, but you couldn't quite put your finger on it. You're not alone. This story, my story, isn't just about secrets buried in the soil. It's about what we bury in our hearts, and what happens when it all starts to surface. Stay with me, because by the time we reach the end, you will finally understand everything. Every strange look, every late-night call, every missing piece. You're here for answers. And you will get them. Let me take you back to the beginning. Not the beginning of my marriage, not even the day I met Mark, but to the first time I truly felt like something wasn't right. It was just a Thursday. One of those quiet, in-between days where nothing special happens and you go to bed believing tomorrow will be the same. I was unloading groceries from the car when I noticed him, standing by the back fence, staring at the ground. Not just casually glancing, but fixated. Like whatever was beneath that patch of grass had been calling to him. When I asked what he was looking at, he jumped, laughed it off, and said he was just daydreaming. But it wasn't just once. He did it again the next week. And then the week after that. Always that same spot. Always that same blank, distant expression. You know when your gut whispers something isn't right, but your mind talks you out of it because you want so badly to believe in someone? That's where I lived for months. We'd been married for over a decade by then. To everyone else, we looked solid, stable, the kind of couple people envy. But behind closed doors, things had changed. Mark used to tell me everything, what stressed him, what made him laugh, what scared him, but lately, his eyes didn't quite meet mine anymore. Conversations became shorter. Nights grew quieter. And the intimacy that once glued us together began to crack, piece by piece. I blamed it on stress, work, aging. You name it. It's easier to find excuses than face the truth. Because the truth, that requires action. And action requires courage. Most of us don't know we're lacking it until it's too late. Then came the letter. It was postmarked from a town I'd never heard of in upstate New York, with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No greeting. No signature. Just one chilling line. You don't know who you're sleeping next to. That's it. That's all it said. I remember standing in the kitchen, staring at those words like they were written in fire. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear it up, burn it, forget it ever arrived. But I couldn't. Because deep down, I knew. I knew that letter was right. And once you know something like that, there's no going back. You can't unfeel it. You can't unsee the cracks. You start replaying every moment, every conversation, searching for signs you missed. That night, I didn't confront Mark. I watched him instead. Every move, every breath. And when he drifted off to sleep, I lay there wide awake, wondering if the man lying inches from me had been lying in ways I couldn't even imagine. I started digging, not literally, not yet, but online. I searched his name, his past jobs, towns he'd lived in. At first, nothing. Just the usual traces of someone's digital life. But then I stumbled across an old article, buried in a local archive. It wasn't even about Mark directly. It was about a cold case, an unsolved disappearance from 20 years ago in a small town in Vermont. The victim, a woman named Rachel Miles. Her photo was black and white, grainy, but there was something about her eyes that haunted me. And right there in the article, plain as day, was a quote from a witness who claimed she had seen Rachel arguing with a man in a pickup truck the night she vanished. The description of the truck? Identical to the one Mark drove when we first met. I tried to tell myself it was a coincidence, that the world was full of similar trucks and overlapping stories. But the weight in my chest wouldn't let me ignore it. I saved the article, printed it, and hid it under a floorboard in our bedroom. I didn't want Mark to see it. Not until I was sure. Not until I had more. So I started watching him more carefully. I noted his routines, his habits, and most importantly, his lies. They were small at first, harmless, like saying he had a meeting when I knew his office was closed, or claiming his phone had died when I had just seen it on the charger. I didn't call him out on them, not yet. Instead, I waited for the moment they would all unravel. And they did, just not in the way I expected. 2 weeks later, the police showed up. No sirens, no shouting, just a knock on the door at 7:42 a.m. Mark opened it, and I'll never forget the way his shoulders slumped when he saw them. Like he knew it was over. They handed him a document, a warrant to search and excavate our backyard. No explanation, no answers, just legal language and clipped voices. Mark didn't say a word. Not to them. Not to me. He just sat down on the couch, buried his face in his hands, and whispered, "I was trying to protect you." Protect me? From what? From who? That's when it hit me there was more. Something buried. Something literal. And as the officers moved toward the back of the property with ground-penetrating equipment and cadaver dogs, I realized this was no longer about suspicions. This was about truth. And whatever they were looking for out there, bones, evidence, a body, I had a feeling they were going to find it. So now I ask you, what would you do? If your entire life suddenly cracked open like a fault line, exposing everything you thought you knew as a lie, would you stay? Would you run? Or would you dig like I did, not just into the ground, but into your past, your memories, your marriage? This story is more than a mystery. It's a confession, a revelation. And it's only just begun. The secrets hidden beneath our feet are about to change everything. And right as the shovel struck something solid, one of the officers called out. He waved me over, his face pale. "Ma'am," he said, "you need to see this." But what they uncovered wasn't what I expected. Not even close. I didn't walk over right away. I couldn't. My legs felt like they had detached from my body, frozen in place, the rest of me vibrating with panic. Every second felt like a siren screaming in my ears. The way the officer's voice had dropped into that grave, cautious tone, it wasn't the voice of someone who'd found a piece of old plumbing or an animal skeleton. This was something heavier. Something sacred. Something dangerous. I finally forced myself forward, feet dragging across the grass I had mowed 100 times before, past the tulips I'd planted last spring, back to the same patch of earth where Mark always stood, eyes distant, soul somewhere else. And now I understood why. He knew something was down there. Something he had hoped would never come to light. But before we get there, before you hear what they found, I need you to understand the life I thought I was living, the one I was defending even as it collapsed beneath my feet. Mark wasn't just a husband. He was, in many ways, my anchor. When we met, I was in a bad place. Fresh off a broken engagement, stuck in a cycle of self-doubt, working at a dead-end job in a town that felt like it didn't even know I existed. Mark appeared like the answer to a question I hadn't dared to ask. He was kind, steady, attentive in a way that felt almost old-fashioned. He listened when I spoke. He opened doors. He remembered little details most people forget within minutes. He was the kind of man who brought you tea before bed and tucked a blanket around you without needing to be asked. He gave me safety, and that kind of comfort can be addictive. We moved quickly, too quickly in hindsight. Within a year, we were married and settling into this house, this plot of land that now felt like it was breathing beneath my feet. We didn't have kids. Mark said he wasn't ready, and I accepted that. But now I look back and wonder if it was about more than readiness. Maybe it was fear. Or maybe he knew something about himself, about what he was capable of, that made the idea of fatherhood feel like a risk he couldn't take. I don't know. I may never fully know. But what I do know is that the first few years were good. Not just surface-level good, but deep, soul-settling good. Until they weren't. Around our 9th anniversary, something shifted. It wasn't explosive. It was subtle, like a tide pulling back from the shore inch by inch. Mark got quieter. He stopped leaving his phone out. He started locking the basement door. And once, when I asked why he'd driven 3 hours out of town without telling me, he stared at me like I was the intruder. Like my question had crossed a line that hadn't been there before. That moment stuck with me, not just because of his response, but because I realized how quickly I backed down. I'd learned not to poke the sleeping dog. Not because he was violent, he never raised a hand, but because he had a way of making me feel like I was losing grip on reality whenever I questioned him. Gaslighting, I think they call it. But I didn't have the word for it back then. I wasn't entirely alone during this unraveling. Our neighbors, Amanda and Sean, had become close friends over the years. Amanda and I walked together in mornings, shared coffee gossip, the usual neighbor-wife therapy sessions. But even she noticed the quiet tension between Mark and me that I tried so hard to hide. One afternoon, she asked me flat out, "Has Mark been acting strange lately?" I laughed it off, changed the subject, but the way she looked at me, it was almost like she knew something. Later that night, I replayed our conversation over and over in my head. What had she seen? What made her ask? And that brings us to the night 2 weeks before the excavation. Mark had fallen asleep early, but I couldn't rest. That's when I did something I hadn't done in years. I went into his garage. Now, I'd never been forbidden from going in there, but it had gradually become a space I simply avoided. It was his sanctuary. His tools, his truck, his files. But that night, something pushed me. I don't know if it was fear, or instinct, or some combination of both. I found a box in the corner, sealed with black duct tape. Inside, dozens of photos. Not of us, not of family, but of unfamiliar people. Women, mostly. Different ages, different backgrounds. Some looked candid, others posed. But one detail connected them all. Each one had a date scrawled on the back, and every date was spaced about a year apart. I didn't recognize any of the faces. Except one. Rachel Miles. That's when the walls of denial finally caved in. This wasn't about a buried disagreement or a long-held grudge. This was about people. Real lives. Real disappearances. My hands were shaking as I put the box back, heart pounding in my ears like a war drum. I told myself I would take the box to the police the next morning. But when I went back, it was gone. Just like that. As if it had never been there. And when I asked Mark about the garage, he told me, smiling as if we were discussing weekend plans, that he was reorganizing some things for work. I nodded. But inside, I was screaming. I didn't sleep after that. I barely ate. And that's when the paranoia began to seep in. I started second-guessing everyone: Amanda, Sean, even the mailman. Were people watching me? Was I being followed? I noticed a white sedan parked across the street more than once. And when I approached it one morning, it drove off before I could see who was inside. Another time, I overheard Sean talking on the phone outside, and I could have sworn he said Mark's name, followed by the word cover. I didn't know what it meant, but it unsettled me. Then came the second letter. No envelope this time. Just a folded paper shoved under our front door. Different handwriting, but a similar message. Look deeper. He's not the only one lying. Now I was spiraling. What did that mean? Not the only one? Who else was involved? I started questioning everything, my memories, my friendships, my own instincts. Could Amanda have known more than she let on? She once mentioned that she and Mark had gone to high school together in another state. I didn't think much of it at the time. But now? Every connection felt suspicious. Every coincidence felt orchestrated. Even my own brother, Kyle, who'd always been skeptical of Mark, had started asking weird questions. He visited out of the blue one afternoon and kept probing about our yard, of all things. "Still got that weird hill in the back corner?" he asked, casually, like it was small talk. But when I said yes, he seemed uneasy. I asked him what he meant, but he shrugged it off and said, "Just a weird memory, forget it." I didn't forget it. And then the dogs arrived. Not ours, cadaver dogs. Brought by law enforcement, tipped off by someone anonymous. That's what the lead detective told me. "We received a credible tip," he said. "Something about remains. Possibly human." My blood turned to ice. Mark was in the kitchen when they arrived. He didn't run. He didn't argue. He just stood there, stone still. Like he had known this day would come, and he'd already made peace with it. As the officers pushed farther into the yard, Scanning the ground and marking spots with little orange flags, I realized this was no longer a story I could control. It had taken on a life of its own. The house I thought was my refuge had become a crime scene. The man I thought I loved was now a suspect. And I was either a pawn in something much bigger, or I was about to uncover a darkness I couldn't even imagine. And then they found it. A wooden box, buried 3 feet under the soil, sealed tight, weather-worn. Inside, something that changed everything. But what they pulled out wasn't a body. It wasn't even close. And that's when I knew this story had only scratched the surface. The wooden box looked ordinary at first. No markings, no lock, nothing that screamed danger or secrets, just aged wood stained from years of burial. But as the officers opened it and slowly peeled back the damp fabric lining the inside, I leaned forward instinctively, expecting to see, I don't even know, bones? Jewelry? Maybe a faded photo? But instead, what lay inside was a single, leather-bound notebook. Not torn or water-damaged like you'd expect after years underground. No, this thing was pristine, sealed inside a plastic sleeve, almost like someone had planned for it to survive. One of the officers gently lifted it out and flipped to the first page. I caught a glimpse of handwriting. Familiar. Slanted. It was Mark's. That should have felt like a breakthrough, a moment of clarity. But instead, it felt like the beginning of something much, much worse. They wouldn't let me read it, not at first. Ongoing investigation, the detective said, eyes avoiding mine. But I could tell from his face. Something in that book rattled him. Not in a violent way. In a calculated, disturbed kind of way. That same night, they took Mark into custody, not officially arrested, but for questioning. He didn't fight it. He didn't even say goodbye. Just nodded as they led him out the front door and disappeared into the night, leaving me standing there in my robe, heart thudding like a drumbeat I couldn't turn off. I thought things would start making sense after that. That the police would find answers in that journal, piece together the scattered fragments of Mark's past, and reveal the truth behind those names and faces. But the next morning, I received a call from the station. The detective sounded off. Hollow, almost. He told me the journal had gone missing. Not stolen, not lost, just gone. As if it had never been there. No security footage of anyone taking it. No record of who had handled it last. The officer who had first cataloged it couldn't even remember what he did with it after logging it into evidence. It was like a gap had opened in everyone's memory. Like that piece of truth had been swallowed by something bigger. That's when the warnings began. At first, it was subtle. An envelope left on my windshield. No return address, again. Inside was a photo. Me, walking alone at dusk, 2 days earlier. Taken from a distance. The caption? Stop digging. I sat in my driveway for almost an hour, clutching that envelope, unsure whether to call the cops or burn it. I chose the first. They didn't seem particularly shocked. Just added it to the growing file and told me to be careful. Be careful? That was all they had? My husband might be tied to multiple disappearances, there's a notebook that just vanished from a police station, and someone is watching me, and their advice is to be careful? I started questioning everyone. Amanda had been distant lately. Sean barely made eye contact. My brother Kyle stopped returning my calls. And then there was the woman who showed up on my doorstep one evening. Early 40s. Nervous energy. Claimed her name was Dana and said she had once dated Mark. Years ago. She told me they'd lived together briefly in a town I'd never heard of. He was charming, she said, until he wasn't. Her eyes darted across the yard as if she feared someone was watching. He kept things. Trophies. Bits of paper, photos. From every woman he ever. She stopped herself, glanced toward the street. I just thought you should know, she whispered, then got into her car and drove off before I could even ask another question. The next morning, when I tried to follow up with the name she'd given me, I hit a wall. There were no public records of any Dana matching her description in the towns she mentioned. No DMV records, no social media, nothing. Like she had never existed. I started to wonder if I was losing it. But I remembered her eyes. The way she looked at me. That wasn't acting. That was fear. And then something strange happened with my phone. I was trying to upload the photo of the notebook box to back it up, just in case, but every time I tried, the app crashed. I tried a different app. Same thing. I emailed it to myself. The email never arrived. I took it to a tech store and the guy behind the counter told me, "It's like someone wiped just that image remotely." When I asked if that was even possible, he hesitated. Let's just say I've seen weirder. He looked nervous, too. Everyone was. It was like the very air around this investigation was charged with something unseen. A force trying to keep everything buried. Then the final blow, or so I thought. I received an anonymous voicemail. The voice was distorted, processed to sound inhuman, like something out of a crime podcast. It said only one thing. "You're asking questions that don't have safe answers. Walk away." I replayed it over and over. Tried to trace the number. Of course, it was a burner. At this point, the police were no help. I think they'd hit their limit. Too many dead ends. Too many vanishing pieces. So I did what I probably should have done weeks earlier. I went to the basement. The one place I had avoided for years, not because I was banned from it, but because some part of me didn't want to see what it held. Mark used to spend hours down there, tinkering, organizing, claiming it was just his quiet space. But the deeper I went, the colder it felt. And not just in temperature. There was something wrong with the air itself. Stale, heavy. I found boxes, unlabeled, sealed. Most of them were harmless. Old tools, wires, receipts. But one caught my eye. It was taped shut with the same black duct tape I'd seen in the garage. I opened it carefully, heart racing, hands trembling. Inside were maps. Dozens of them. Old, detailed maps of small towns across the Northeast. Vermont, Pennsylvania, Ohio. Each one had red pins marking specific locations. Backyards, forests, even some lakes. And on the back of each map was a name. Some were names I recognized from the articles I'd read. Others were new. And just one was Amanda. Her name. In Mark's handwriting. Pinned to a lake just outside Syracuse that I dropped the box. So now the question isn't just who was Mark, really? It's who else knew. Amanda had always been a little too curious. Too quick to change the subject when I mentioned anything strange. Had she been protecting him? Helping him? Or had she been a victim too? Pulled into something bigger than either of us realized? I don't know yet. But I do know one thing. Amanda is gone. Vanished. No forwarding address. Sean says she left him. Packed up and disappeared. But that's not the Amanda I knew. And just this morning, a new envelope arrived. No photo this time. Just one phrase. "She was trying to help you. You've made a mistake." But the handwriting? It wasn't Mark's. And now, I have no idea who I can trust. I stared at the envelope for a long time, fingers trembling, the note inside burning a hole through every last thread of comfort I had left. "She was trying to help you. You've made a mistake." The words swam in front of me, and not because of fear, because of rage. Until that moment, I'd been surviving on the belief that this nightmare was linear. That if I could just uncover the truth about Mark, his past, the missing women, the secrets buried in the basement, everything else would fall into place. But now, I wasn't just losing control. I was losing the story. Because if Amanda had been trying to help me, why hadn't she ever told me what she knew? Why had she disappeared the second things got real? And more importantly, who else knew she was helping and cared enough to punish me for it? The knock on the door came just hours later. My brother, Kyle. Pale, breathless, and carrying something under his jacket. "I need to talk to you," he said, voice clipped, already pushing past me into the living room. I hadn't seen him in days. He looked shaken. Not the usual kind of stress you see in someone going through a breakup or a job loss. This was something deeper. Something haunted. "They sent me something," he said, dropping into the chair and unzipping his coat. He pulled out a manila envelope, no postage, no label. Inside, wrapped in plastic, was a necklace. Old. Tarnished. The kind of thing someone might have worn 20 or 30 years ago. And attached to it, a sticky note with a name scribbled across it. Rachel Miles. I felt like the air got knocked out of my lungs. That name had followed me like a ghost ever since I found her in that newspaper article, the same woman who vanished decades ago, tied to the truck that matched Mark's. But what was her necklace doing in Kyle's possession?
And who had sent it to him?
I asked him outright if he had ever known Rachel. His eyes widened, and he shook his head. I don't even know how they know I'm connected to this. I've kept my distance from everything. I've stayed out of it. But someone clearly didn't believe that. Someone was trying to drag him into this just like they had me, or maybe they already had. I pressed harder. Kyle, is there anything at all that you haven't told me about Mark? From before we got married. He hesitated. That pause, the kind that stretches and swells and makes your skin crawl, it told me everything I needed to know. I never liked him, Kyle finally admitted. You know that. But it wasn't just a vibe. It was something that happened years ago, before you met him. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice low. I was living upstate for a while in Scroon Lake. Mark passed through town. I only met him once briefly. He was using a different name. He said he was just passing through on business. Something about construction, I think. But later that week, a local girl went missing. Her name was Elise. You wouldn't have known her. She was a waitress at this old diner just off Route 9. No one ever found her. No body, no trace, just gone. And when I saw Mark's picture with you years later, I knew it was the same guy. I sat there stunned. Why didn't you tell me this? He looked ashamed. Because I didn't want to be wrong. Because you looked happy. And because if I had brought it up and it turned out to be some weird coincidence, I knew I'd lose you. That admission, as raw as it was, felt like another betrayal stacked on top of the already crumbling tower. My brother had been holding on to a potential link to a missing woman and a false identity all these years, because he didn't want to hurt me? Or because he was scared of what might unravel. It was all too much. I needed proof. Something solid. I grabbed the necklace and drove to the police station. But the moment I got there, something else derailed the entire day. The detective handling Mark's case, Detective Albright, was gone. Not on vacation. Not reassigned.
Gone.
As in, no longer working there. No official reason. No one would say where he went. And the case file? Under review, the officer at the desk told me. Temporarily restricted. I left feeling like I'd just stepped out of reality and into a scripted thriller. That evening, the power went out. Not the neighborhood, just our house. And not because of weather or some down line. When I called the power company, they said there had been a manual shutdown request filed 2 hours earlier, under Mark's name. But that wasn't even possible. He was still in custody. I lit a candle, tried to stay calm, and waited out the silence. But in that quiet, I heard something else. A low creak from the attic. I held my breath, convinced it was my imagination. But then I heard it again. Not a mouse. Not the wind.
A step.
Someone was up there. I didn't go check. Not because I was too scared, but because I had the sudden, sickening realization that maybe someone wanted me to check. Maybe this was a setup. I stayed downstairs, phone in hand, heart pounding. When the lights came back on 2 hours later, nothing was missing. But something was added. A slip of paper taped to the inside of my bathroom mirror. In red ink, "You're not the only one with secrets." The handwriting was familiar. Not Mark's. Not Kyle's. Amanda's. But Amanda was gone. Which means either she's not, or someone wants me to believe she's still out there. And just like that, I no longer knew if I was being hunted, tested, or drawn into something far older and darker than Mark's crimes alone. Because now, the mystery wasn't just about my husband. It was about me, that I'd barely slept that night. Every creak of the house felt like a scream. Every shadow cast by the hallway light seemed to breathe. I lay in bed, covers pulled to my chin like a child, the slip of paper from the bathroom mirror folded tightly beneath my pillow. I must have read Amanda's handwriting 100 times, turning each curve and letter over in my mind, trying to convince myself it wasn't her. That someone was mimicking her script, trying to unnerve me. But deep down, I knew. Or maybe I didn't know anything anymore. The lines between truth and delusion were bleeding into each other, and I could feel my grip loosening. I wasn't just living inside a mystery. I was becoming part of whatever was fueling it. And that realization terrified me in a way nothing ever had. The next morning started like a scene from someone else's life. Bright sky, birds chirping, a delivery truck rolling past like nothing in the world was wrong. I tried to hold on to the illusion, made myself coffee, fed the cat, opened the blinds, hoping routine could ground me. But it shattered the second I checked my phone. There were 12 missed calls from Sean, Amanda's husband, or ex-husband, depending on what version of the story you believed. The last voicemail, left at 3:42 a.m., was just heavy breathing followed by a single phrase, "She's gone. They took her." Then silence. That was it. No names. No explanation. And now Sean wasn't answering. I threw on a sweatshirt and headed to his place, 3 doors down. His car was parked outside, door wide open, keys still dangling from the ignition. The front door to the house was ajar too, just slightly. Enough to say someone had left in a hurry, or someone had been inside who shouldn't have been. I hesitated for only a moment before stepping inside, heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. The living room was trashed. Couch cushions on the floor, coffee table overturned, framed photos broken and scattered like the aftermath of a hurricane. I called out for him, my voice trembling, already knowing no one would answer. And then I saw the wall. Someone had scrawled words across it in what looked like thick, black paint, or maybe ink. I couldn't tell. For words, "She was never yours." And below it, pinned with a steak knife, was one of Amanda's scarves. The one she wore every other weekend like clockwork when we walked to the farmer's market. But it wasn't just pinned, it was soaked through. The color, once pale lavender, was now almost black. I don't know if it was ink, blood, or something else. I didn't stay to find out. I backed out of the house, numb, dizzy, barely able to breathe. Sean was gone. Amanda had already disappeared. Mark was in custody, or so I thought. But when I called the detective's office to report what I'd seen, I was told something that made my stomach turn cold. Mr. Lambert was released earlier this morning. The voice on the other end said casually, as if they were informing me about a rescheduled appointment. I nearly dropped the phone. "He made bail last night. Didn't you know?"
No. No, I didn't.
Because no one had told me. Not the police, not his lawyer, no one. Mark had been walking free for hours, and I had no idea where he was. I drove home in a daze, locking every door and window the moment I stepped inside. My hands were shaking too hard to even hold my coffee mug, so I set it down and paced, heart pounding like a war drum. I checked the security cams I had installed outside just days earlier. Nothing strange. No movement. No cars.
Just stillness.
Too much stillness. That kind of unnatural quiet that starts to feel like a warning in itself. And then the back door creaked. Not fully open, just a shift, the way it does when someone brushes past it or leans into it slightly. I crept over, holding my breath, and peeked through the slats of the window. No one. But I swear I heard a voice whisper my name. It's possible I imagined it. But what came next? I couldn't have made that up. My phone vibrated with a new message. No number. Just a blocked sender and a photo. It was a picture of me, standing in my kitchen just minutes earlier. Same outfit, same mug. The angle of the shot made it clear it was taken from outside, through the narrow space between the curtains. There was no caption. Just the image. I dropped the phone, adrenaline surging like fire through my veins.
Someone was watching me.
Had been inside my property. Maybe even inside my house. I called the police, again. Filed another report. They promised to send someone by, but I knew what that meant. A quick drive-by, a few questions, maybe a note in the file. But no real help. No real answers. I was on my own. Again. That night, I bolted the doors and took a kitchen knife to bed with me. Sleep was impossible. Every sound became an alarm. Every passing car felt like a threat. I watched the hallway through the crack in my bedroom door, like a sentry guarding a castle under siege. At one point, the lights flickered. Just once. Enough to send me into a fresh wave of panic. And then, hours later, as the sun began to rise, I found a second message slipped under my front door. A single sheet of paper. On it, in the same distorted handwriting I'd seen before, were just 3 words. "You're next, Evelyn." That's when I realized this wasn't just about Mark's secrets, or Amanda's disappearance, or a box buried in my yard. This was personal. Someone wanted me to stop digging not because I was close to the truth, but because I was part of it. And now, no one could tell me how far this darkness went, or if I'd survive it. I didn't open the paper right away. I just stared at it, those 3 words, asterisk next, Evelyn asterisk, rattling around in my skull like a thunderclap that wouldn't stop echoing. My name, written by someone who clearly knew me, someone who had crossed the invisible line between watching and threatening. Whoever they weren't afraid of being known anymore. And that meant one thing: the game had shifted. This wasn't about intimidation anymore.
It was about control. About cornering me.
And for the first time since the first knock at the door, I felt something far worse than fear. I felt hunted. I spent the entire day inside, blinds drawn, jumping at every creak and knock, triple-checking the locks even though I knew that meant nothing now. My phone buzzed constantly, calls from blocked numbers, voicemails with empty static, texts from numbers that disappeared the second I tried to call back. I was unraveling. Every minute that passed felt like another layer of my life was peeling away. I couldn't eat.
Couldn't think.
I kept wondering if I'd missed something, some crucial detail that could have warned me this was coming. Then I remembered the old floorboard in the bedroom, the one I had used to hide that newspaper article about Rachel Miles weeks ago. Maybe that was a place to start again, some tangible thread I could still control. When I pried it open, I expected to find the article exactly where I left it. But I didn't. Instead, there was something new. A cassette tape. Unlabeled. Just sitting there, as if it had been waiting for me. I don't even own a cassette player anymore, but there's an old one buried in the garage under a box of Christmas decorations. I dug it out, hands shaking, nearly dropping it on the floor as I fed the tape in and hit play. Static at first. Then breathing. A long, deliberate exhale. And then a voice I hadn't heard in over 15 years. My father's. At first, I didn't believe it. He died when I was in college. A heart attack.
Sudden.
Brutal. But there was no mistaking it. That cadence, that southern edge he could never quite lose, the way he said my name like it was fragile. "Evelyn," he whispered. "If you're hearing this, then I've failed to keep you away from all this. I hoped it would die with me. But some things don't stay buried, no matter how deep you try to hide them. There's more you don't know."
About me.
About your mother. About Mark. My mother? The woman who died in a car accident when I was 8? The woman whose memory I'd carried like a broken photograph in my mind for years? My heart seized in my chest. The tape continued, his voice becoming more urgent, more broken. "Mark isn't who he says he is. But neither am I. We're connected. More than you know. I tried to protect you from that. I tried to keep you from digging, from asking questions. But if you're hearing this, it means the past found you anyway. You need to find the blue folder. It has everything. It'll explain who she really was." The tape cut off in a burst of static. No goodbye. No more clues. Just that, who she really was. I sat on the garage floor for over an hour, unable to move, too stunned to cry. My father, gone for 15 years, had left behind a secret that connected him not only to Mark but to my mother, whose death I had never once questioned. I'd believed the official story. Rainy night, black ice, tragic accident. But now the facts I had built my identity on were crumbling like sandcastles against the tide. I tore the house apart looking for that blue folder. Every closet, every drawer, every crack in the floor. Nothing. And then I remembered the attic. I had been too afraid to go up there when I heard the noise days earlier, but now, fear had been replaced by something far worse. The need to know. I pulled the ladder down, flashlight in hand, and climbed into the dusty dark. It was suffocating. The air was stale, heavy with insulation dust and rot. But in the far corner, tucked under an old tarp, was a box I'd never seen before. Inside, there it was, a blue folder, and with it, photographs. Not just of Mark, but of my father and my mother, all together, at a cabin I'd never seen before, smiling like they weren't hiding a single thing. But what chilled me to my bones was the fourth person in the photo, Amanda. Not as a neighbor, not as a friend, but as a young woman, barely 20, standing beside them like she belonged. I flipped the photo over. One date. One word. August 1992. Origin. I sank to the floor, the pieces crashing into each other in my mind like shattered glass. Amanda hadn't just been a friend. She was part of this story long before I ever moved to this neighborhood. Before I met Mark. Before I even knew who I was. And that meant her disappearance wasn't random. It was planned. Or staged. Or worse, she had never disappeared at all. Maybe she had gone underground to keep herself safe. Or maybe she was working from the shadows, pushing pieces across the board, watching me react. I don't know what origin meant. A place? A project? A code name? All I know is that I was born into a lie. And the man I married wasn't the start of it. He was just the final move in something that began long before I ever had a choice. And then, just as I lowered the photo, I saw the red light blinking from the corner of the attic. A camera. Someone had been watching me. Not just recently. For years. The attic was dead silent, except for the sound of my breathing, rapid and shallow, filling the space like an alarm. The red light on the camera blinked steadily, calm, almost mocking, like it had been waiting for me to notice it. Like it knew the exact moment I would. I stared at it, a cold sweat breaking over my back, and everything in me screamed to rip it off the beam and smash it to pieces. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because somewhere in the darkest part of me, I knew this was the key. The final thread that connected all the others. And if I cut it before I understood it, everything would vanish again. Just like the notebook. Just like Amanda.
Just like the truth always did.
I climbed down with the blue folder in my hands and the photo burning a hole in my mind. I couldn't look at it again yet. Not until I figured out what it meant. Who was behind that camera? How long had they been watching? Had I been a subject in someone's experiment? A puppet in a twisted family drama playing out across generations? I pulled my laptop out and connected the security feed I'd secretly set up weeks ago when I first started fearing for my life. I had forgotten it even existed. It was slow, lagging from the attic's poor Wi-Fi, but finally, the screen flickered on. One file. Time-stamped 2 hours ago. I clicked play. At first, it was just me, dusting boxes, prying open the crate with the tarp. But then movement. A shadow behind me, barely visible in the camera's periphery. Someone else was in the attic, standing completely still, just out of my line of sight. My stomach dropped. I rewound, rewatched,
Zoomed in.
It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't my imagination. Someone had been up there with me. But it wasn't Mark. It was Kyle. I couldn't breathe. My own brother. The one who had cried on my couch, sworn he was scared, warned me about Mark. The same man who had told me nothing connected him to Rachel Miles except a faint memory of a girl gone missing. But in the grainy footage, there he was, tall, unmistakable, watching me from the shadows of our childhood home like he belonged in that darkness. My mind reeled with questions. Was it possible he had orchestrated all of this? Had he been manipulating me, feeding me just enough fear to keep me looking in the wrong direction? I pulled out the photo from the folder again, studied it harder, and that's when I saw it. Behind Amanda, just out of focus, was a teenage boy with eyes too familiar to ignore. It was Kyle. He'd been there in 1992, at the cabin, with Mark, with Amanda, with our parents. Everything snapped into place with such brutal clarity, I nearly collapsed. The reason Kyle had recognized Mark wasn't coincidence. The reason he knew Rachel's name. The reason he'd shown up with her necklace, as if someone gave it to him. He hadn't been dragged into this mystery. He had always been part of it.
But why now?
Why expose himself after all these years? Unless this wasn't about hiding anymore. It was about finishing something. I didn't have time to think. A noise from the front door. Quiet, deliberate. Not a knock.
A key.
I grabbed the kitchen knife I kept tucked in the drawer now. Waited. Footsteps in the hall.
Slow.
Familiar. Evelyn, he called, like this was just another family visit. Like we hadn't crossed the line into madness. I stepped into the living room, blade shaking in my grip, and there he was.
Kyle. Calm.
Almost smug. No sign of the fear he'd worn like a mask these past weeks. You found it, he said, nodding toward the blue folder on the coffee table. Dad always said you'd figure out eventually. You lied to me, I said, voice raw. You were there. You were part of it. He nodded again. We all were.
Mom. Dad.
Amanda.
Mark. Me.
You too, though you didn't know it yet. It started long before you were born. Something about truth. It's like a virus, Evelyn. It spreads when people get too curious. And curiosity got Mom killed. It got Amanda scared. And it got Mark. Well, you've seen how far he fell. I could barely hold the knife straight. What did you do? He took a slow step forward, eyes never leaving mine. I cleaned up what they left behind. Dad made us promise never to let it surface. Not the experiments. Not the tapes. Not what we did out at that cabin. We thought we could keep it buried. But then you married Mark, and he got sloppy. Started collecting again. And you started digging. You made it impossible to keep you safe. Safe? That word ricocheted in my skull like a shot. This wasn't about safety. This was about control. Kyle wasn't trying to protect me. He was trying to contain me. Because somewhere inside that web of secrets was something explosive, something so dangerous he'd rather break his own sister than let it come to light. I don't want to hurt you, he said, reaching into his coat. But if I have to, I will. I didn't wait. I lunged, clumsy but desperate, swinging the knife with everything I had. He caught my arm, twisted hard, the blade clattering to the floor. We crashed into the table, the blue folder scattering pages across the carpet. He pinned me down, breath hot against my face. Stop asking questions, he hissed. But I couldn't stop. I headbutt him, shoved him off, grabbed the nearest object, a lamp, and swung. He went down hard, dazed. I grabbed the tape recorder from the couch and ran. Out the door. Into the night. I didn't look back. That was 2 nights ago. I've been hiding since. Motel to motel. Watching the news. Waiting for someone to find Kyle's fingerprints on the tapes, or for Mark to resurface, or for Amanda to send another clue. Nothing yet. Just silence. But this morning, taped to my motel door, was a new envelope. Inside, a USB drive. No note. No name. Just one file. A video. It was dated 3 days from next week. The footage?
Me.
Sitting on a bed in a motel room. This room. Staring into the camera. Speaking words I hadn't yet said. I know the truth now. But I'm not the only one. The screen went black. And I realized, this isn't over. Not even close did I watch the video 12 times. Not just because I couldn't believe it, but because something about it felt impossible, like seeing a version of yourself that hasn't happened yet, one that knows something you don't. My face in that video wasn't the face of someone afraid or running. It was calm, focused, the way you look when you've already made a choice. And that terrified me more than anything else. Because whatever choice I was about to make, it had the power to change everything. But the real question wasn't about the future. It was whether I could live with the past now that I finally understood it. Because every lie, every betrayal, every strange coincidence and whispered warning, they were all pointing to a single, brutal truth. I had been raised inside a system of secrets so old and deeply rooted that no one involved could even tell where it began anymore. The people I trusted, my husband, my brother, my own parents, they weren't who I thought they were. They were architects of a buried history, protectors of something they believed had to stay hidden. And I was just collateral. Until I wasn't. I didn't go to the police. I knew by now how that would go. Files would vanish. Witnesses would recant. Officers would disappear. I had seen it all play out already, like clockwork. No, I went back to the house. Not because I was brave, but because I was tired of running from something that started in my own home. It was a strange kind of quiet when I stepped inside, like the place had been waiting for me. Every creak in the floorboards felt familiar now, like the house itself was exhaling. I went straight to the attic, retrieved the camera, and found a small hard drive tucked behind one of the rafters. It wasn't labeled, but I knew exactly what it was. Evidence. The kind that doesn't just break stories, it breaks people. I watched the footage in the living room, one file after another, each time-stamped, each a piece of the puzzle I had been chasing for what felt like lifetimes. There were recordings of the cabin. Old, grainy footage. My parents. Amanda.
Mark. Kyle.
Experiments. Conversations about preserving memory. About transference. A program they called Origin, some hybrid of behavioral study, psychological manipulation, and legacy preservation. It had started as a research project, but it became something else. Something obsessive. Something personal. My mother had tried to pull out. That much was clear. She had realized what they were doing wasn't science, it was control. She left the program. And 2 months later, her car crashed on a road she had driven 100 times before. No black ice. No poor weather. Just a sudden steering failure. A clean kill. I sat there, sobbing quietly as the screen faded to black and the last video played. It was Amanda. Older. Tired. Her voice was barely above a whisper.
Evelyn, she said.
If you're watching this, then I've failed. I thought I could protect you by staying close. But they've always been 10 steps ahead. I was one of them once. But I changed. And I tried to guide you without drawing too much attention. Kyle found out. He knew what I was doing. He made me disappear before I could warn you. But I want you to know your mother didn't die for nothing. She died trying to stop this. And now it's your choice whether to finish what she started. Or disappear like the rest of us. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't eat. I didn't cry. I just sat at the kitchen table, the same place where Mark once made me laugh over burnt toast, the same place Kyle once told me ghosts were just stories. And I wrote everything down. Every detail. Every name. Every event. And then I backed it up, twice, on drives hidden in places no one would ever think to look. I created a password-protected folder and sent a copy to a reporter I once met during a local interview. No explanation. Just a subject line. If anything happens to me, release this. And then I waited. But nothing came. No knocks. No shadows. No new threats. Just silence. Like they knew they had lost control of the narrative. Because once the story isn't just yours anymore, once it's loose in the world, it's a lot harder to erase. Weeks passed. Then months. I moved. Changed my name. Disappeared in the way that only someone who's been hunted knows how to. I never heard from Kyle again. I don't know where Mark is, or if Amanda's truly gone. But I do know this. Truth is a living thing. You can bury it, suffocate it, rename it, but you can't kill it. And someday, somewhere, someone else will stumble across a strange folder, or a cassette tape, or a grainy video that doesn't make sense. And they'll start asking questions. Just like I did. And when they do, I hope they don't stop. Because even though I may never understand the full scale of what I uncovered, even though I've sacrificed everything for pieces of an answer, I know one thing with absolute certainty. The story was never just about me. It was about how far people will go to bury the truth. And how far I had to go to unearth it. And maybe, just maybe, that story isn't finished yet. Because last night, in the mailbox of my new address, a place I never told anyone about, I found a small envelope. Inside, one photo. A cabin. And on the back, just one word written in that same, slanted hand I thought I'd never see again. Home.